Teacher Meg here, and welcome back. We're taking things in a little bit different direction this time, and we're going to talk on our new series more specifically about communication. And what is communication? I'm sure you've noticed that in the past modules we've looked at and talked about in class, all the leaders have some very magnetic power, and we talked about many adjectives that we recognize in great leaders, but there's one important thing that they all have in common: good communication skills. Okay, so let's look into that a bit more in a detailed manner. Okay, so what is communication exactly, especially in this context? Well, people are not mind readers. People judge you by your behavior, not your intent, which means they look at how you're acting, and that's what they think about you. They don't judge you by what you're intending to do, right? So successful communication is dependent on what is heard, not what is said. Right? I'll say that again. Successful communication depends on what the listener hears and not what the person actually says. Okay, so basically, communication is understanding that between and among people, it's an interdependent process, which means it's not just one person that communicates, right? There's a listener and a speaker, right? And both of them are communicating to each other. Communicating does not mean talking. Actually, that's the least of it, right? Communicating is constant. You can't not communicate because we're constantly giving and receiving communications, right? Like we looked at before, body language is huge, right? If you are a teacher and you're trying to say something to your students and they're just like, not looking around, well, that is communicating that they're bored, they don't care, and the teacher might get a little bit frustrated or annoyed, right? That's communication. Say someone shows up late for a class, for a date, for anything, right? At least in Canadian culture, that would also have a negative communication, right? You can come in, you didn't say anything, but the people are judging you based on your behavior. You're late, so you don't care about this. It's not important to you because you didn't make much of an effort to come, right? So good communication, though, it's a habit that we have to develop, right? And as Mark Twain, the famous writer, as he said, habit is habit, and not to be flung out the window by any man, but coaxed down the stairs one step at a time, right? So you can't just develop good communication overnight. Like some people, we definitely know they're born with better communication than others, but just like everything in leadership, you have to work at it. Okay, so for a practical example in American history, you're probably not super familiar with it unless you were raised in the USA. But there is a very, very famous speech, and it was called the Gettysburg Address. Okay, so we can think about the primary speaker that day at the Gettysburg Cemetery in the dedication on November 19th. This was in 1863, during the time of the American Civil War. So, do we remember the primary speaker's speech? Well, not so much. However, the second speaker we do remember, right? And that second speaker was Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States. His speech was very, very short in comparison with the first man who spoke. The first man was Edward Everett, and he was the most popular orator, the most popular speaker of that day. He was really good, right? And he talked and gave a speech that was over 2 hours long, 13,607 words to be specific. Someone counted. But Lincoln, his was just kind of a off the cuff, as we say, secondary, afterthought, 272 words and around 2 to 3 minutes. Now, why is this so important? Well, in American classrooms, all the children have to memorize this speech. That's how good it was, and the communication that is passed down through that. So I'll just give you a little glimpse. Sounds something like this.
87 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Okay, so it goes something like that. You can click on the link in the description below and actually listen to that for yourself. It's less than 3 minutes, but it is very good pausing and intonation. Obviously, we didn't see any body language or eye contact, but the way it's said is very simple and it's good at communicating, right? Everyone probably fell asleep with the other guy's speech. So, in other words, just like in architecture, building things, sometimes the idea is that less is actually more. It's not just about how many words you say, right? Sorry, I say a lot. But let's just do a quick overview to finish up this video. Okay, so communication, in case you're wondering, I think this is the most interesting part of this course. When we speak face to face, what is happening with our communication? Well, for one thing, it's not just about words. All right, so speaking face to face, like this couple here, they're so in love, giving the heart. First of all, body language, right? Your hands, looking at their eyes, all of that stuff. That is 55% of what we communicate, what we say, right? After that, tone of voice, intonation, high, low, stress, right? That's 38% of what people hear. So what you're doing and the sounds you're making, right? That comes up as most of it. And then we have the words we say. Less than 10% of all that's happening for face-to-face communication. So you think about that, how we were born to communicate, right, before the age of telephones and texting and all of that. This is how humans were born to communicate, mostly with body language and tone, or at least that's how they're being judged. And the smallest part with words. You've probably realized this if you've ever traveled to a country and you don't speak their language, right? Body language is huge. An example is when I lived in South Korea for 2 years. At the beginning, kind of at the end too, I could say in Korean, "Where is blah blah blah?" The problem was I couldn't understand the answer that they'd give me. So I relied fully on body language to get me there. 감사합니다. Thank you. Right? And that would take me so far. Right? But I didn't actually understand. I just relied on the body language and nodded my head. Yeah, sure. Right? Now, what about when we take away face to face and just look at telephone, right? You know, well, that changes things a lot. We have our tone, which becomes now the most important part, right? Is 87% of what we hear. I know when I was younger, I used to sit on the kitchen counter as my mom was working away in there, and I'd be talking on the phone to my best friend for hours. Just blah, 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 blah. Sometimes, though, you're not really focused on what they're saying, right? And you're just hearing like, da, 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 da. Oh, yeah. Da, 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 da. Yeah. Oh, good. But you're not actually listening. You're just hearing tone of voice. The words are not really there. So on phone, you think it'd be more, but it's actually only 12% is the words. And body language, 1%. I don't know how exactly this would fit in on a phone because you can't see each other, but there might just be imagination. Okay, so every single part of you is involved in communicating, and this defines who you are and what type of interaction you want with your listener. All right, and just because you're not saying anything right now doesn't mean you're not communicating to me, right? At least in a face-to-face context. That's how it works. Okay, so this is just an introduction of what is communication. I think it's a really good idea to review this and pause and think about how you communicate. What do you use the most, would you say? I have a problem with words, but I try to do more body language. What do you think this would be for texting? And how does this affect relationships that people have? Right? Imagine when you make our words and emojis, right? Like 100% of our communication. That's going to totally change our intention in our meeting, right? I think everything is a lot better understood in real life, and I think we can all agree that. So please do me a favor. Don't ever tell your girlfriend, boyfriend, crush, whatever, anything important for the first time, like I love you, over text, okay? It just won't. Just stop, okay? Anyways, I'll see you in the next module where we'll get into more details about this and things we should do to communicate, just like Abraham Lincoln. Go check that video out. It's kind of big words, but it's the communication, intonation, that's everything. Okay, so I'll see you in the next module.